Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Environmental Answers podcast, EnvAns for short. We're here today to basically bring you clarity on what's what in the environmental industry. I'm joined by Rebecca Vidra. She's a professor of, how would you say, ethics in the environment at Duke
Sure.
University.
Perfect.
She's going to help us essentially walk through the mind for the work that we do in the environmental industry. I really appreciate some of the questions we got beforehand, and we're going to get through those today. So how are you doing, Rebecca? How are you doing? How are things going?
Thank you for asking. I'm doing really well, and I'm also not doing well, which is something that I think is not unusual in these times. So yeah, the idea of how you can hold both things, that's the theme. That's my theme for 2025. How can you be doing really well and then not be doing really well all at the same time? How are you?
I'm doing all right, taking it one day at a time, like you said, holding two things at once, trying to balance it out. So I'm really, wanting to hear a little bit more about your academic journey and personal background and how that connects to the issues that we're trying to get into today.
Yeah, sure. So I always like to start when I'm asked this question with being a kid, because it was so foundational in a way that is different from like the general story that a lot of people have who get into this work. And that is because I grew up on the shores of Lake Erie in Cleveland, Ohio, when Lake Erie was not doing well. So algal blooms, fish kills. My dad was an environmental scientist, and I was never allowed to swim in the lake. And so I kind of grew up with this idea that people had destroyed nature and that we needed to do something about it. And in my schooling, when I went to the Ohio State University, and I knew I wanted to be a teacher, and I knew I wanted to do something about the environment. And so I was able to major in environmental education, which was great. But after college, when I was an AmeriCorps intern, actually, for the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, I started to realize that even if I wanted to work with people, wanted to work in the human dimensions of environmental issues, I needed to have a really strong background in science. So that was my first sort of realization post-grad. And also that I was really excited about restoration, because it sort of tapped back into this idea that I had as I was growing up, that humans had destroyed or damaged nature, and gave me a way of thinking about healing that relationship. So restoration is very different than like, let's go find the prettiest, most amazing places and protect them. It's really often about like, let's find the most disturbed, degraded places and let's go fix them. And so I went back to graduate school and went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for my master's degree in landscape ecology, and then North Carolina State for my PhD in restoration ecology. And since my PhD, I've been at Duke. So I've done all three schools, big schools in the triangle. I have a loyalty to none of them sports-wise. But
Good answer. Good answer.
Yeah, but I just finished my 21st year teaching at Duke University. So I've spent the majority of my career there.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we connect. There's 2 points I want to go back to. One, maybe you've told us this and it never really stuck for me that you were in AmeriCorps, because I did AmeriCorps. I was at the Maryland Conservation. I did Maryland Conservation Corps in Maryland, so I was at a wildlife sanctuary as well. So that's a point of connection that I was not aware of, and I understand. I guess like when I hear about like restoration versus like preservation, like thinking about like restoring something that had been maybe not used for original purpose or wasn't as pristine, to then be able to restore it and then be able to preserve it is what I heard from you. Yeah. And then, just all the connective points. It's really nice to hear. The follow-up question I had also was, what are your thoughts when it comes to the intersection between mental health and the environmental leadership? A lot of what it takes, especially with you being an educator for 21 years, I can imagine that you've experienced some of your students coming to you about like feeling fatigued by the issues when it comes to the environment, mentally fatigued, and then understanding like that component of leadership.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack here. And so I think that I'll start with just acknowledging that, okay, I've been teaching for 21 years. And by and large, things have not gotten dramatically better in the environment, right? I mean, I think we could point to lots of successes, but, look at, carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere just for one, or amounts of plastics in the ocean. Those things have gotten dramatically worse over the course of my career. And if I were to focus on those things, then I could not get up in the morning and do what I do. People will often tell me like, oh, you have the greatest job. You get to impress all of these people, in this at this impressionable time in their lives. And yeah, but I also see people moving through these programs really pretty quickly. It's quicker all the time from my perspective. And I often wonder about, whether or not I made a difference. And so I think one of the things that I have learned is to find a source of motivation in my personal day-to-day life that will then carry over into my professional day-to-day life. And to find ways to acknowledge beauty in the environment or beauty in people and in community that's going to inspire me to do the work. And I came to that. I have a recommendation, actually. Okay. It's an old YouTube video from Paul Hawken. He was giving a talk at the Bioneers conference, like 15 years ago. I'll send you the link. It's really cool. Okay. Anyway, he is talking about, he mentions like there are all of these organizations all over the world working for an environmental and social justice, I think is what he says. And he starts, he's in this big lecture hall, and on the screen behind him, the names of these organizations start to scroll. And some of them are familiar. The vast majority of them are not familiar. And he says, we could sit here all day and watch these names go by. We could sit here all night, all the next day, all the next night. We still wouldn't have seen the names of all of these organizations that are working for environmental and social justice. And it was this video that sort of woke me up to this idea of we all have a place, right? We're all doing our thing, but it's the collective, the unknowable, unimaginable collective that is going to make a change, make changes, right? And so how do we feel part of that and feel connected, but not overwhelmed by the scale of the challenges? And so really from, especially the last several years, I've really started to build this into my own practice as a human. Yes, I am so privileged. I get to teach at Duke University and I see all these students, and that's one small thing, right? But also just as part of this sort of system, like it makes me feel like it's worth it, and it's worth it to keep going. Because, I alone, I'm not gonna change the world like in a big splashy way, but in these like really small, delicate, beautiful ways. I think we all are doing that work. So I tell my students, like, imagine that we're all part of this web, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we're connected to some of these organizations, some of these other people, but it just expands way beyond what we can even imagine.
I know for me, as someone who's been a beneficiary of your work, especially when I took your ecosystems course, I really understood that important piece because you had us read Braiding Sweetgrass. And when we read that book, there was a component of like the need for connectedness and working together. And so like hearing you bring that point up again, it's important for people that are listening in to remember that like there are so many people that are doing this work. So we have to like partnership and work together and continue to just like move forward. Would you agree to that thought?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? This goes against what our culture likes to do, right? We all like to celebrate, maybe we don't all like to, but we feel motivated to celebrate individual success, right? And so you go to LinkedIn and you see everybody who's won awards, gotten promoted, got new jobs, me. And it's part of what our culture teaches us to do, right? And I don't think that that's all bad, but how do we do that and lift ourselves up while also recognizing that we're part of this bigger system, bigger web? And again, like those are two things that you have to hold at the same time. But I know that when I talk to my students about this, when I mention LinkedIn, LinkedIn is great for a lot of things, but I just see the look in their eyes of like, I don't feel like I'm enough, right? Mm-hmm. We're all enough. Yeah. And that attitude is not going to make you a successful X, Y, or Z, right? Like we have to break out of these ideas that what I'm doing isn't enough, I'm not enough, and step back into the work.
If I could double click on that for any of the students that feel that way, I know for me, I use LinkedIn more like a diary of tracking what I'm working on, but not necessarily a value meter of how much I'm doing. More so like you track how connected you are. So, use it more as a tool of connecting, not a tool of comparison. But I know growing up in the age of social media, it's easy to get into that comparison trap, especially when you see these lists. I know for me being an entrepreneur, that's not 30 or under, seeing Forbes 30 under 30 list, like knowing that I can't like get on that list, even though I'm working on my startup and stuff like that, can make you have series of imposter syndrome. So anyway, that was just a sidetrack to acknowledge the fact that like you can still get on the platform, you can still learn from the platform, but use it more so as a tool for learning, not for one of self-comparison and thought. Anyway.
Yeah, I've often thought of like starting a list of my own,
Mm-hmm.
like Rebecca Vidra's 17,000,
Yeah.
17,000 list. And then like the only qualification is if you haven't been on one of those lists, you can be on my list.
I like that. I like that 100%, because one, that keeps people motivated, to know that like you do matter. It doesn't matter when you come into your understanding of your purpose. It doesn't have to be by a certain age, but more if you get there. And that's that. But no, I appreciate that thought. Another question I had for you, which is a little bit to the side, is like something that we care about a lot at Environmental Answers is searching the definition of sustainability, as we find that like people that work in the environmental space, they all define it differently based on like their point of view. So I was just curious, based on your experience and where you sit, how would you define sustainability from your perspective?
Yeah, it's funny, I probably have like 20 years of PowerPoint slides with like the three-legged stool of sustainability. And I think I might, since we know that, I think I might actually come at this question of thinking about the relationship between sustainability and resilience. Because resilience has also gotten a lot of attention, and I think is an interesting concept with some challenges in and of itself. And as just like straight up a restoration ecologist, I mean, what you're aiming for is an ecosystem that is resilient, because we know things are going to change, and you want this wetland or community garden or coral reef to heal to the point where it can withstand the regular disturbances of life, the flood, the hurricane, whatever it might be, and flourish. And so, I'm sort of interested in then, are all sustainable systems resilient systems? Can you be sustainable if you're not resilient? Can a system be sustainable if it's not resilient? Because I've often wondered, like, what are we sustaining in sustainability, right? And so those are just more kind of questions more than, like, how do you think about the relationship between this sort of concept of sustainability and this concept of resilience? Where does that come up for you?
You're asking me back, where does it come up for me, Tiana? I think like the concept in resilience for sustainability comes with the mindset. Part of the reason why I really valued having you on specifically during Mental Health Awareness Month is that what can we actually maintain consistently and be able to get everyone on the same accord. I think a lot of times people are not given the opportunity to understand, like, if you talk about, is it Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Like, like if you don't have like the bottom ones, filled in, you can't focus on self-actualization. And I feel like a part of sustainability that people forget out with the mental part is that you have to have the basic things filled in before you can even lean into that and like be able to build resilience in that. So that's a lot where my perspective lies. I'm very curious, because I think another thing goes back to a point we had earlier in the environment and the work that we do. There's all these different silos of work that's happening, but how can we all get on the same page, and how can we work together in a consistent fashion, not just for the purposes of competing for profitability, but also like connecting for prosperity within our space. So anyway, that's my response back to that thought.
I love that.
Yeah. From an ethical perspective, how should we consider responsibility as environmental leaders, especially when we're prioritizing our mental well-being?
Right. So there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, one is just sort of this idea of ethical responsibility, or some people will call it a calling or a purpose. Other people like sort of frame ethical responsibility as like, what kind of person are you? Am I a good person, right? And I think if you're thinking about leaders, positional leaders who are managing or leading a group or a team, there are some particular sort of responsibilities that you may have to them, but there's also sort of an approach, a character approach to it, right? Like I want to be led by people who I think are good people. And that often manifests in the work environment as someone who is willing to put in the time and energy, not just to get the work done, but to listen, right? Listening being so, so important. And I think, you and I could probably come up with like a list of like what it means to be a good person in a professional place. But I think that question is really, really important when we start to talk about ethics, because I think even just the word ethics or the phrase ethical responsibility is not intuitive. Like people don't intuitively know what that means, but I think we all have a sense of what it means to be a good person. And, some of the things we've already touched on, I think are crucial when we think about environmental leadership. This idea of lifting up those who are around you. I like to use the metaphor of a leader having a mirror to reflect light back, right? Like, making sure that people start to appreciate what they themselves are bringing to this organization or to this project, and are motivated to do good work, but are also I think one of the things that we need to do in any situation, whether we consider ourselves in a leadership role or not, is to check in on each other and make sure that we're taking good care of ourselves. I don't know about you, but I don't really like it when people tell me that I should take care.
But no, I mean, I hear you. It leads to the next question, which is about like the burnout based on eco anxiety, because we're dealing with a lot of these things and we're prone to burnout. So it's kind of like you have to take care of yourself. Right. So I know I don't necessarily like that, because it's like, it makes me, it's like I'm doing the best that I can, but like having to really make a conscious effort in doing it is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. And if I could kind of go off a little bit on this on a tangent, something happened this spring that really just like kind of woke me up, and it had been bubbling for a little bit, but I live in a neighborhood now that I never wanted to live in. It's kind of one of these like fake neighborhoods, and I love it. I love it. One of the things I love about it is that there's a greenway that runs through the neighborhood and then out either sides. And there's a really nice trail, and it runs along a stream, and there are woods. And this is the same kind of greenway that I studied for my PhD. And what I was interested in as a PhD student were the plants. And I was thinking about like, when you have these forests that are completely invaded by Japanese honeysuckle and kudzu and privet, like, basically, are they worth anything? Should we get rid of the invasive? Should we not? And my dissertation work basically answered that question with, no, we shouldn't do anything about this. They're heavily invaded systems. Even if you get all the invasives out, they're just going to get reinvaded. Plus, the invasive species provide all these habitat benefits, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that was 21 years ago. And in my mind, although never out loud, I consider these kinds of forests, so like these like kind of just like little remnant strips of forest in urban and suburban, I consider them junk forests. That's what I call them in my head. And now I live in a neighborhood with a junk forest, and there's a greenway. So I've been walking. And I started to go off the trail in the spring as things started to come up. And, I saw the things I was expecting to see: the privet, the Elaeagnus, the honeysuckle, all these invasive plants. But what I also started to find were so many native spring wildflowers, so many, like patches of lilies that were bigger than anything I had ever seen. Jack in the pulpits, mayapple, so many of them, including some shrubs that flower in the spring, like these viburnum species, all native. And it just floored me. I thought, like, okay, these species have been here all along. They have not been outcompeted by these invasives. They are thriving. And I wasn't able to see them before because I was only looking for the invasives. And so I was wrong to call these junk forests. I was wrong not to see them in the fullness of what they can offer as refugia, like these little pockets of nature and of biodiversity. And so now I am, as a result of this and a few other things that have been happening in my career, I am like super curious about what else I'm wrong about. Right. And I think that helps with the burnout part. Right. And I think given where we are as a country right now, I think it behooves all of us to just take a deep breath and think like, where may I be wrong? Where can I be just a little bit more open-minded? Where can I learn something new about this thing that I know so much about? It's not to say that this is like a simple solution to burnout, because it's not. But for me, it's been incredibly powerful. And I just can't wait to write about it. But
I look forward to reading about it. I mean, even how you told me about it, because I know that I've experienced things like that where I'm super passionate about a thing and I've in my head made like it 100% this way, but then being able to go back to that thing that you thought and be adaptable, that shows grit and resilience. I'm reading Angela Duckworth's Grit, like the book, and like she talks about like having that mental flexibility to go back and revisit thoughts of that kind is important. So that's kudos to you for having like so much grit to continue in this work, even when it seems like you're stuck in what was once called a junk forest. It looks like it's an opportunity of what is it, a resilience situation, because the plants have come back. They're starting to like essentially be like, okay, you're not going anywhere. I guess I'm gonna have to figure out a way to adapt around you. At least that's how I would process it. So, no, that's good. I'm looking forward to see what you write about that. That's exciting.
Thank you.
So I wanted to follow up a little bit about like decision making, like really like when you're in these positions, maybe you work at a company and you're the solo sustainability manager. That's a lot of the people who we work with and talk to at Environmental Answers. Like, how do you make decisions based on maybe the ethical dimension? We're assuming that all the people we're working around, they have good intentions, but how do you make decisions in those spaces?
Yeah. So I have never been a sustainability, sort of person in a larger organization. So I can't speak directly to that. But what I can speak about is what it's like to be a teacher in a university full of really smart people who all do very different things. I don't know that students know this, but it can be really isolating to be a teacher. There are lots of things that you could be doing to make your class really great. And you may know a few people, like I have my colleagues that I can sort of chat about, but everybody's super busy. And, they're just like, yeah, I'm sure you're a great teacher, go for it. And the feedback that I get is in the form of a course evaluation, which are deeply flawed in a lot of ways. And so I have learned over, really more recently than I like to admit, that to do this work in a way that feels nourishing to me, beyond student feedback, is to find my people. And they're all over Duke and beyond Duke too, but they're not necessarily like the next door neighbors in my hallway, right? There are people who are teaching in really different disciplines, or who teach at the campus farm or at the Duke Marine Lab, who are facing their own sort of like not terrible challenges, but like exciting opportunities, and are trying to figure out how to do this work. And I feel like I can learn from them, but also feel supported in this kind of isolated role. The trick, of course, for all of us when we're doing this, when we're finding our people, is to not do that comparing thing, right? And so, I feel like I have to stay true to myself and what I know, imagining that I might be wrong about some things, and just really, really try to find the people who are going to reflect my light back to me, right?
No, that's helpful. And that's a good perspective to have. Like having community to talk to about the work that you're doing, to be able to make clear choices and decisions because you have a trusted community around you. So outside of even your silo of the work and maybe even the organization that you're in, having the opportunity to have people that you are working alongside in this work sounds like a really good and continual theme in this episode. For your mental, you need to make sure that you are connected, because we as people, we thrive when we have community and being able to engage and look at what they're doing, being able to celebrate their wins, and maybe learn from some of the things that they've done, and them to then be able to celebrate. I'm looking forward to this 17,000 lists about you, of all the people that we're cheering you on, and you're cheering us on.
Yeah.
Why do you think so often, at least from my perception, particularly environmental leaders deal with challenges when it comes to their mental health? I was reading some articles about the fact that this particular profession comes with that. So what are some of your thoughts about why that might be such a big thing for us compared to maybe some other professions?
I heard somewhere, I wish I knew where, that there are no environmental wins, there are just delays.
Okay.
So like this idea of like you get a law passed for X, Y, and Z, it just sort of like delays there are going to be some future challenges. You're going to have to keep showing up. And we're seeing this right now with really important pieces of environment and climate legislation being threatened, right? So like you have to like pick yourself up and keep going and keep going. And that is hard. That is hard. And so we have to celebrate the whatever we're going to call the wins, the pauses, or else we're just going to get, it's not even just burnouts. It's like crushing depression. It can be because we see decades of work in some cases being undone. And so how do we stay optimistic? How do we still continue to show up every day? And I think the first step and the most important step, and the one that all of us have to keep taking, is the showing up part, right? Like, okay, I'm going to keep going. And some days you don't want to. I mean, I have this fantasy, and I bet other people do too. I want like a little card shop that sells ice cream and flowers. And that's a really hard business. I know. I don't know anything about it. So I can like have a little fantasy about how that would be so wonderful. But yet I keep showing up to my work. Something we did in the past year at the Nicholas School that was so important it happened on the faculty listserv, if you could believe it. Somebody reached out and said, hey, we're welcoming this new class of PhD students. I need a list of successes and environmental successes to share with them, because so much of our work is depressing. So then people started to write about them, and they wrote them in like little stories. Like, we did this. And actually, I want to back up. It wasn't, we did this thing in Peru or whatever. It was like, well, let's look at the bald eagle. And this piece of legislation, which did this, that, and the other thing. And it was like one of these things where like a couple people respond and then everybody starts responding. And I just felt like, oh, if we could only make a mural of those stories that we walked by every day and like just wondered, like, what's the next part of the mural going to be? So the first step is like showing up. And the other thing is, how do we celebrate these successes, wins, moments, pauses in ways that feel life-giving? You could go collect a ton of trash on a beach with your community. You could go out there, you could have a great day, you could get all this trash, take all the pictures of it, right? And underneath it all, we all know it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
But we need to celebrate not just the trash that we picked up, but the community that we connected with, and that sense of making a difference. I just think that is so important.
It's fundamental. No, I agree with you. One of the initiatives that we're launching here, June 26th, I have a pitch day for like my startup. And so like we're doing, it's called Data story action. So being able to take raw data files or any files of any sort, your notes, your ideas, a list like this, and be able to craft a story based on this data to lead to action, because people are motivated by stories. So that point is like having that list, whoever had that, I say, brilliant idea to request that list of successes, that breathes life because it keeps people motivated, that there is some light at the end of the tunnel, even when it seems really dark. That little speck can do a lot. So, you know what I mean? That little drop in the bucket actually can have a ripple effect, because most people, you know, if they know something positive, it's attractive. It makes it so that you want to try to follow that. So no, I really, really appreciate that and resonate with it. So the closing thought and question, because we really appreciate it. I mean, 30 minutes went by super fast.
I know.
You know, hope, resilience, and the collective care is really the thinking. Are there any particular resources, such as books or practices and philosophies, you would recommend to an individual seeking to navigate this work? I know you mentioned I'll make sure to get that link for me to put in the show notes, but if you have any other things that you would think to tell us to check out, we really appreciate that.
You know, I think books are so personal, right? Like, I love the writing of philosopher Kathleen Dean Moore. I resonate with her, though. She's a professor. She's a mom. She writes about Pacific Northwest. That's not a place that is particularly resonating for me, but I hesitate to recommend books. But here's what I would recommend, and it's a little bit maybe on a tangent, but I am on a tangent. I am really excited about understanding what civil discourse is, and what constructive dialogue is, and what bridging differences. So I'm learning a lot about this so that I can then bring it into my classes. Great. As doing all of this, the Greater Good Science Center at the University of Berkeley is an amazing resource. It's a resource of all sorts of things, great articles, little quizzes, practices. They have a podcast called the Happiness Podcast with these practices that, often like meditative, contemplative practices that can be really beneficial. And it feels like a treasure chest of freely available activities that you can do by yourself or with your friends or with your classes. And I just cannot recommend it highly enough. Greater Good Science Center. They also post webinars that I would really recommend people.
No, that's a great resource. I'll definitely clip that in. I typically ask, this is more of like where have you been recently in environmental space that you like, whether it's a travel space or if it's a physical space that's been built around you, just as a lasting, what space have you shared recently that you can reflect on that you've enjoyed? It doesn't have to be recently. It could just be of all time, but
yeah. Oh, well, I have a good one.
Okay.
My neighborhood that I don't like, that I know. And I took my daughter there, who's 10, and I'm always forcing her to go on walks. And she was stunned by this location. And it simply is a field that the town of Chapel Hill planted wildflowers in. They scattered wildflower seeds. And even though I'm an ecologist and I trained in North Carolina, I did not expect that here in early May, there would be an explosion of colors, like all the colors of the rainbow. You can
a beautiful bloom.
Yeah. And it's not just how sometimes you see those really beautiful flowers along the highway, but it's often like the same kind of flower. This is like so many different species, everything from red to blue to purple. It's amazing. And there's a dog park there. So you can go to the dog park, you can get on this greenway, go through the junk forests, and you can see this wildflower meadow. And it's just yet another little life lesson for me. Yes, I can go to amazing, beautiful places and experience this amazing, beautiful nature, but I don't need it. This wildflower meadow is the most beautiful memory-making place I've been in a really long time. And it's right around the corner.
That's beautiful. I love that. That's a great way to end. I just want to say thank you again for taking some time to be on the Environmental Answers podcast. We thank you. We think the work that you're doing is an environmental answer that we want to uplift. So thank you for your time. If anyone wants to keep up with you, what's the best way to stay in contact with you?
Well, I'm over there on LinkedIn, trying not to celebrate myself. No. And I can be reached through my Duke email as well.
Okay. That's perfect. No, we'll definitely follow you on LinkedIn. I think it's a good resource and one that you have to use effectively. So thank you all again for listening to another episode of the Environmental Answers podcast. We're bringing you clarity on what's what. If you have any questions, know that you can always email us at ask.envans.org, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Also, if you're curious about the data story action project that we're working on, please send us a question. We would love to hear from you. All right. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.